Hello and welcome to a very special edition of the Wire Wrap. Over the course of the next 1 hour, we are going to take you through the highlights of the last year, what happened at home, our politics with our neighbors and our friends, along with movies, comedy and culture and what lies ahead. I'm Sravasti Dasgupta.
And I'm Jahnavi Sen.
And we have two very special guests joining us for this special edition. We have Siddharth Varadarajan, he's founding editor at The Wire, and Sushant Singh, consulting editor at The Caravan, to help us unpack this all.
So to start with, I want to ask both of you, if you had to define 2025 in one word, what would it be? And explain it to us in under 1 minute. Sushant, why don't you start?
So, it's very difficult to define a year in a word. It's like capturing the whole life in a bottle kind of a thing. But I would say if 2025, if there's one word which could probably define 2025, it would be war. And I'm not just saying because of Sindoor, essentially because Mr. Modi has gone out and spoken about that this is not an era of war, but we have seen Ukraine-Russia going on. We have seen what Israel has done in Gaza. We've seen Thailand, Cambodia. We have seen things going on in Sudan, and things have gone on and on. And it is because of these wars that India has been exposed in a certain sense. India's vulnerabilities have come to the fore. What Trump has done with respect to Sindoor or what's happened in Ukraine. So if there's one word, if you were to limit it to one word, I would say war is what would really talk about in 2025.
So that?
Ooh, well, one word. Can I have two?
Okay.
Okay. 2.5. I think bursting of bubble. I think, implosion, if you want to use one word, or a kind of disintegration. I think for me, what defines 2025, right, is, and again, I'm going to say focus on foreign policy, right? The idea that Mr. Modi had taken India, brought India to a place where it had a certain global, equation with the US, and a certain global stature. The whole world is with India. The world is looking up to India. That illusion has been shattered so brutally in the last 12 months. I think beginning with his, I still consider, ill-advised, decision to rush to meet Donald Trump after his inauguration, and then Trump hitting back with tariffs, and then all the claims about bringing an end to Operation Sindoor, which Mr. Modi clearly didn't like. Although I doubt that. I think Trump is. Both sides are exaggerating, but I think obviously the US played a role there. So this, the reality check about India-US relations, the reality check. Sushant mentioned Sindoor, of how the world actually, India expected the world to run to India's defense and take India's side explicitly. Nobody did that. So that shattering of illusions, the idea that we ain't exactly in a spot globally that we thought we were at. I think that would, to my mind, define 2025.
Yeah. So if I were to add to what something Siddharth said, it was like you come to know what Warren Buffett said. You come to know who's swimming naked once the tide runs out. And 2025 was the year, particularly with Sindoor and Trump's re-election, when India's tide ran out. So this sweet spot where all these vulnerabilities, whether these are economic vulnerabilities with China, whether these are strategic vulnerabilities with respect to the United States, defense vulnerabilities with respect to Russia, you could overcome them and things were fine. But the moment the tide came down, you were exposed all throughout. And this is the outcome of what 11 years of Mr. Modi's prime ministership has brought us to, that we were not prepared at all for this. So now you want to compromise with China, you want to welcome Putin while still not hurting Trump, you want to still go out and do something for Trump. But Trump 2.0 is very different from Trump 1.0. So this is an year where India has been left completely exposed once the tide has run out.
And we kind of deluded ourselves.
Yeah.
We deluded ourselves into thinking, in fact, the Modi Jaishankar team,
Yeah.
Were convinced that the return of Trump is going to be great for them, great for India. And, so we're in this funny position where the whole world, was recoiled in shock and horror when Trump won the election and was inaugurated in office this year. But, the Indian establishment was very thrilled. And the reality, burst upon them a month or two later.
So clearly,
you both done your 1 minute.
So clearly,
okay.
Hand over to Sravasti at this point.
No, before Sravasti you comment, because so Trump 2.0 is very different from Trump 1.0, and I think the mistake, Siddharth, which they made was to think that Trump 2.0 is going to be a continuation of Trump 1.0, and because in the Biden years, because India was this very attractive thing where the Biden administration would look away when the state departments were writing dissent telegrams and still invite Modi for a state visit. They would look away when even transnational operations were coming to, because they somehow had put India at the top. Campbell and others had put India at the top of the thing. And from there to come to Trump 2.0, where India doesn't exist. Trump's worldview is very old world. There are three powers, three great powers: Russia, China, US. The world is divided between them, and other than that, nobody exists. Whether it is in Europe or India or Indonesia or South Africa, he really doesn't care. So we've actually come into a position which India was not prepared for. Sorry.
And I think that's a very good point where we can launch into our first topic of discussion, because both of you mentioned shattering of illusions and war. The most decisive incident this year, I would say, perhaps was the Pahalgam terror attack, in which 26 Indian tourists, mostly Indian tourists, were killed, which was followed by Operation Sindoor, which was then followed by a 4-day-long military conflict between India and Pakistan for the first time in decades. Now, the conflict ended with US President Donald Trump claiming that he had mediated a ceasefire between the two countries, a claim that he continues to make till this day. Now, the NIA says that it's ready with a charge sheet of these attackers, but what really has happened in the last year is that India has sought to position itself after Operation Sindoor as one who has taken decisive action in a break from the previous government, and we've also seen multi-party delegations that went across the world. So, do you think Operation Sindoor has been a success?
Well, I will start by saying that the idea that previous governments did not take decisive action, or that it depends what we also this whole definition of what amounts to decisive action is something that needs to be debated and discussed. I think the response of the Manmohan Singh government to 26/11, it was not bellicose. There was no mobilization of troops. There was no attack, but through patient accumulation of evidence and mobilization of global public opinion, we accomplished a lot. You actually compelled the Pakistani side to admit admit to the fact that Pakistani nationals, Pakistani organizations were involved. Cases were filed there. The Pakistanis were able to unearth additional evidence to support India's case, and in a sense, that was something quite unprecedented, right? It's a different matter that the whole investigation, trial, etc., it kind of ground to a halt, and there are other factors, other reasons for that. I don't think a military style attack would have changed that reality on the ground. So this idea that earlier governments are not decisive is not correct. And decisiveness in the case of Sindoor, the question you have to ask yourself, right? And Sushant will perhaps say more about what exactly the balance, in the 4-day conflict, what was gained, what was lost in military terms, right? But the question you have to ask yourself is, after Pahalgam, our leadership took the view, Mr. Modi, others, that this is unacceptable. What has happened? Pakistan is involved in Pahalgam. It's no decisive, concrete evidence that would satisfy other capitals was provided, and you still hear other capitals, other governments saying that we were never shown anything or told anything. So this remains an unresolved issue. But let's accept for a minute that the government of India has compelling evidence of Pakistan's involvement. Certainly, the fact that the Resistance Front, which is a front organization of the Lashkar, claimed responsibility. This gives us enough grounds to assume that terrorists in Pakistan were the ones behind this. But the government's claim was that by doing this, I have dealt a decisive blow to terrorist organizations in Pakistan, their handlers, and I have, in a sense, deterred Pakistan from engaging in future activity. I seriously wonder whether that is true or not. In fact, I've been fortunate to take part in a couple of track 2, track 1.5 interactions with where there were Indian and Pakistani people in the same room. People connected to government in some way or just retired. The Pakistani side is not in the least deterred. They don't think whatever Sindoor did and whatever Sindoor accomplished from the Indian point of view is something which the Pakistanis need to be very worried about, right? So even at the base level, the fact that you took decisive action, quote unquote, I don't think it has delivered what you wanted at the military strategic level, right? So from that, and I think even the government of India knows this, which is why the response to the Delhi blast and the fact that you had a very serious, going by the official version, a very serious plot to have perhaps multiple explosions in the national capital, and you have individuals that they claim are linked to organizations in Pakistan. There's talk of some of them going for training, but the response of the Modi government has been very muted, right? So none of the bellicose rhetoric, certainly none of the promises that were made after Sindoor that any repeat attack will lead to decisive military action. The idea that Sindoor is kept has only been paused and can be restarted. None of that has happened, right? So I think the government of India also knows that somewhere down the line, Sindoor was perhaps not the kind of military strategic success that they had hoped it would be.
Sushant, do you want to comment on this? The fact that, do you think that it's been a success? Because the year kind of started on this note where we saw a military conflict after many decades and the biggest terror attack since the 26/11 attack on civilians. But also the fact that the government went out on a limb to send multi-party delegations across to send India's message. But the year ended with the Delhi blast, as Siddharth was just mentioning. So has this really been a success for you?
To my mind, Operation Sindoor has not been a success. And before that, I'll just add a couple of words to what Siddharth said about 2008, because many of us have spoken to people who were in positions of power in the White House. And one of the top officials of the White House has told me a couple of times that both President Bush and President Obama were very, very clear that whatever India wants, that has to be given to Indians, because they do not want the Indian government to be caught in a situation where it's forced to take military action against Pakistan. And India got massive benefits out of that. All that you saw, the cooperation, the strategic benevolence which people talk about, essentially emerged from India's very mature response. And also do not forget that after 26/11, the UPA government won elections barely weeks after that, and the national election thereafter with a greater majority than this thing. So it was not that it was even politically unpopular. What India did was not politically unpopular. Mr. Modi was standing outside the hotel and giving those speeches as Gujarat CM, but they didn't carry far. We should not forget that. This is a narrative which we now see that somehow the government was extremely unpopular for not going against for not attacking Pakistan. But they won the three-state assembly election barely days after that, weeks after that, and they won the next national election. So they were not unpopular for that at all. So we should be clear on that part, because this is a narrative which has been reconstructed looking backwards. As far as Sindoor is considered, there are two parts to it, as Siddharth said. One is, your very tactical local aims, that you've hit those 8 targets, with whatever drones, or kamikaze drones, or artillery guns, or long distance missile precision guided ammunition fired by the Air Force, etc., etc. And those 8 targets have been destroyed. There's no question about that. There's enough evidence to suggest that those 8 targets were hit and those 8 targets were destroyed. But what were those 8 targets worth? Because in the same morning, you are going and telling Pakistanis, please don't retaliate. It is all over here. And we now know from various speeches, various statements, including by the Indian CDS, that Indians also suffered losses that night. So please remember, on the first night, Pakistan doesn't suffer military losses. It only suffers losses. What are Indians targeted? The terrorists, the so-called terror camps, or whether in POK or in Pakistani Punjab. Those are the camps India has targeted. What has India lost in bargain? India has lost whatever number of fighters that you want to believe, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever, Trump has spoken about 6, 7, others have spoken about 5, whatever number you wish to take. The fact is, India suffers military losses on the first night in its own airspace. Whereas you are going out, the Indian statement, if you remember, on the first night is that we have kept away from military targets, we have only targeted terror sites, this is not meant to be, this is a non-escalatory move. So, and even then you go up and call the Pakistani DGMO in the morning and say, let's call it quits here. So I do not know what the larger aim was. After 4 days, once the Indians reconciled to what the losses were and how they should change their tactics, they changed their tactics and did things. But the fundamental fact is that there was a political miscalculation in understanding how the Pakistanis would retaliate. The Pakistani retaliation completely took Indians by surprise, and it took them days to retaliate according to what the Pakistanis had done, and that meant that both sides were climbing an escalatory ladder, and that is something which clearly the Indian side did not want, and neither did anybody want globally. And what this has led to is essentially you have left the two sides precariously close to an even riskier scenario next time. If, like you guys said, when the Delhi blast happened, Mr. Modi is completely backtracked and not even mentioning Pakistan in any way. He's actually acknowledging that Muslims have been radicalized by his policies as the Prime Minister in the last 11 years. That's essentially what he's acknowledging and conceding by saying that there is no Pakistani role. But we know there is a Pakistani role in that. People have spoken about Pakistani funding. People have spoken about the guy who organized it going to Pakistan, etc., etc. There is as much evidence of Pakistan's involvement as it was in Pahalgam. But we haven't seen that, because clearly you have created a situation where you really do not know how to deal with it, because you don't want to escalate. You're really not in a position to militarily escalate. And the Pakistanis have clearly demonstrated they can escalate. The world has no appetite for it. Trump has no appetite for you going and firing more weapons on Pakistan. Trump is not going to like it. He doesn't like the fact. And you really don't know how to deal with this situation. So overall, by the end of the year, 6 to 7 months down the line, we can clearly see that Operation Sindoor may have had tactical successes for India in hitting the targets, Pakistani air bases, etc. But strategically, politically, diplomatically, it has been a big loss for India. It has, as I said earlier, it has brought to the fore all the vulnerabilities that India has had. So all in all, bigger picture scorecard has been very poor in terms of what Operation Sindoor achieved. But minor details for people who are in the intricacies, how many terror targets we hit, how many air bases we hit, wonderful. We hit a lot of them, and they were good achievements.
Because you mentioned Trump, the other part of Operation Sindoor is, of course, the fact that the conflict came to an end with Trump's claims of mediation, and he said that he used his tariffs as leverage to end the conflict. Now, these tariffs continue to hang over as a sword over our heads. Now, before we move on to the intricacies of what these tariffs, the impact of these tariffs have had in the past few months, and Jahnavi is going to get into that. How do you see the US-India relationship since Operation Sindoor? Have we lost a friend, because Modi and Trump were supposed to be very close, and have we managed to anger this friend for once and for all?
I think I would question. I mean, there are no friends, right? In this scenario here, you have a relationship of uh, hopefully mutual benefit between two countries, right? So countries, unless they are vastly unequal, try to structure their economic, political, social, not social, but electric, the trade relationship, strategic relationship in a way that is, that has benefits for each party, right? And in the main, India would like to argue that what we've had over the last 2 decades is a kind of, you know a relationship of mutual benefit, where U.S. companies have made massive inroads in India. You have a lot of American companies that are active. They've been, investing, making good money here. India has, of course, a trade surplus with the U.S. But if you look at perhaps capital flows, I mean, there's lots of It's not as if American companies aren't making money. U.S. has sold a huge amount of military hardware to India in the last decade or 2 decades, and you know, uh, you know, India has benefited, you could say, from some kind of intelligence cooperation, maybe getting access to certain military hardware. I think the U.S. role in terms of facilitating India's access to the global nuclear trade, which from the 2005 agreement on, that's something that's on the plus side for the Indian ledger. So you have pluses, minuses, but there is no friendship here. And I think the mistake that Modi and the Modi side made was that the supposed personal equation between Modi and Trump is going to allow Modi and India to garner a lot of benefit, forgetting that this guy is perhaps the most transactional president the U.S. side has ever had. And what you're seeing are the public articulation. Now, Trump is a guy, Hindi mein they say muh phat. He says all kinds of things. So, he's disclosed a lot of stuff. And so for him to go public with the fact that he has spoken of trade as and then, as leverage, as part, during the whole Operation Sindoor thing, they have used tariffs to squeeze India. There are other things. We don't know, for example, has the whole Pannu matter, or the fact that there's a case filed against Adani, are these being used to extract other kinds of benefits from India? We've seen the dilution of the nuclear liability law, which is clearly something India has done in response to American pressure. So there's some things that are visible, some things that are not visible, but there is clearly a great deal of or pressure being put on India. And you have, perhaps for the first time, a government that is willing to go as far as it takes to appease America. In the past, the BJP, I covered the nuclear deal very closely, and there were moments when the Manmohan Singh government came under pressure to concede even more than what it had conceded when it signed the agreement in 2005. And then within the country, within the system, the DAE fought back, and you finally had a very balanced and respectable deal. but the BJP used to scream that, oh, the government is selling out. But today you have a situation where you can look at on 4 or 5 fronts. I mean, even on Russian oil, I think one of the most shocking statements was when Jaishankar said, "Oh, we bought Russian oil because America asked us to buy." I mean, what kind of a policy is this? You should have bought Russian oil if you thought it was in India's national interest.
Yeah.
You should stop buying Russian oil if you don't think it's in India's national interest. What does the American demand or request have to do with anything, right? But you're publicly and openly speaking about American pressure and how you've accommodated American pressure. So and this is the same government that talks about Chappan and Chati, about India's rising stature in the world, Vishwaguru, how for the first time the India has has a certain global standing. But the reality that we've seen is staring you in the face, and I think that you're going to see more and more kinds of forms of pressure, because Modi's reaction, the way he reflexively ran to curry favor with the Chinese president, and
Yeah.
it just presented a picture of somebody who's quite desperate and out of cards,
Yeah.
and willing to do anything to somehow get by.
No, I think two more points to what Siddharth added. Siddharth said, one is this whole question about China, which was stated or unstated since the pivot to Asia by the Obama administration, was clearly there that India is the country which the United States needs to deal with China, to contain China's rise, whether in the Indo-Pacific or otherwise. And the Indians recognize this, and this is a question which was always there: who needs the other country more? Whether India needs the US more or US needs India more? And clearly, the Trump 2.0 administration has come out and said, we don't need you. We can deal with China directly. And that leaves India nowhere. I think that's the one big change which has come in. The second change is what Siddharth spoke about, that this strategic umbrella which the United States provided for last 20 years, under which India rose very clearly, benefiting in trade, technology, and even global standing. That umbrella is gone. Trump has clearly signaled, you don't matter to us. But one more point which we should not miss out, and that particularly hurts Mr. Modi politically in India, is what the MAGA crowd is doing there. The attack on Indian Americans by the MAGA crowd on the H-1B visa issue by some of the far right extremists clearly unsettles a lot of Indians. So when else had we seen the Hindu American Foundation chairperson, whatever the swag person is, going out and saying, don't ask us to support you because we are under pressure from all sides. So you had already burned bridges with the Democrats. Jaishankar didn't want to meet Pramila Jayapal. You wanted to campaign against Zoran Mamdani. You hated every single progressive Democrat who wanted to talk about something sentimental, human rights or other values. And now you have the other side, the Republicans, which is fully controlled by MAGA, which really doesn't like you. You may want to think that you are the new Israel, or you are no, they don't see you as the new Israel. They see you as brown skinned people whom they don't like. And this is the kind of constituency, the upper caste, upper middle class constituency in India, which wants to go to the US, which wants to be loved by the US, and which historically over the last 20-30 years has gone out of its way to support a particular worldview of India, a particular kind of politics in India. And that constituency is also under pressure, which puts him under even greater pressure domestically. So I think three things in recent times which have really put Mr. Modi under pressure. One is pollution in Delhi, because you see high being done against the CM. Second is the Indigo issue, because again upper class, his main core support base, their luggage not being found and flying all over the place, and the airlines not working. And the third thing which a lot of people miss out is what's going on with the whole visa and the NRI and the Indian immigrants business in the US. Those three really hurt him politically.
Can I just add two small points? I think you judge the success of foreign policy of any country, right? I think the first test is, are you able to protect the interests and dignity of your own people when they're abroad, right? And I think by that yardstick, we all saw the very painful footage of Indians in shackles and handcuffs being deported from the US. I'm not saying that countries don't have the right to deport people who are there without documents, but the very least that India should have done is to say, look, you can't treat our people this way, and that we will make arrangements to bring them back if you insist on doing this. And parallel to that is
Russia.
Indian young men being conned into these jobs in Russia, where they're then sent to the front lines, and kids have died there, and the government has made ineffectual noises even now, you played host to Putin and tried to present as if you're the best of buddies, having these kind of tete-a-tete conversations in the car. What about bringing your boys back home? Right? So your unwillingness to do this sort of thing.
That's not even only bringing the boys back home. I was just reading a media report. One of the widows actually went and she said that she has spent weeks in Moscow from Punjab, and she says that the Indian embassy doesn't even open its doors for her, so that she can find where her husband died, what the last rites are, what are the benefits that can come to her or her children. So completely. And also, now don't forget what happened to women from Arunachal Pradesh in China. What are you going to do about securing the rights and the honor of Indians if you're going to talk about it? So I think all in all, it doesn't reflect well on India, and particularly on Mr. Modi's prime ministership at all, as to what has gone on the foreign policy.
I'm going to backtrack a little bit and go back to talking about the tariffs and the US-India relationship from that point of view. Now, it's nearly been 5 entire months that a 50% tariff on most Indian goods is applicable in the US. That, as we know, this was 25% for what Trump called reciprocal, and 25% penalty for India deciding to buy Russian oil. Now, most of the industries that are heavily hit by this are very labor-intensive ones. There's textiles and carpets, things like that. There's gems and jewelry, and seafood. And there are other industries. I mean, if you look at the export numbers, particularly for November, the numbers are still kind of high because there are those industries that are still exempt, like pharmaceuticals, there's electronics, including some smartphones. But we have been seeing a lot of news reports about how these very labor-intensive industries, they're not seeing orders in the same way, workers are being laid off. So, 5 months is a long time for a tariff that India was not prepared for, exporters were not prepared for, also because the government didn't prepare them for it. What do you think the implications have been of this, Sushant?
Yeah, so I think there are two parts to it. One is the tariffs have not gone away because we've heard the deal is round the corner, deal is round the corner. The deal has, to my mind, the deal has primarily not happened because the US doesn't want a piecemeal deal. It doesn't want something where 25% tariffs go off, and then in the next stage we will have soybean and other stuff coming in with all the other concessions that Indians are making. They want a bigger deal. And the second thing, which a US diplomat told me very recently, is that you look at the deal that Trump administration did with Korea or with Japan. There have to be big headlines where the other country is supposedly making huge concessions, or even the United Kingdom. Is the Indian government willing to provide Mr. Trump those big headlines where India is willing to concede a lot? And I think clearly the Indian government and the MEA are very reluctant to provide those headlines. They still believe that they can somehow manage and get the 25% tariffs off, and then keep on negotiating about doing the other stuff for the trade for the trade agreement. And clearly that strategy has failed. Now, please remember this: the Indian exporters can suffer losses for a certain period of time, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. No exporter can afford to suffer losses greater than that. And then they lose their buyers. The buyers will make alternative arrangements. And even then, if you have a deal, it is too late to get those buyers back. They will go to Vietnam, they'll go to Bangladesh, they'll go to Thailand, they'll go wherever they need to go because that's where the rates would be better, rates would be easier. And the Indian exporters will not be able to find those buyers again. And also, let's not forget that no other country in the world, whether it is Russia, whether it is Chile, whether it is wherever we are signing an FTA, or even EU, and there's no FTA with the EU, as we know, that's also gone further into the future. No other market can replace the US market for Indian exporters. So clearly, this is something in which the Indian government is not able to find a way to deal with the Trump administration or find a way to engage with the Trump administration. I don't think that anybody in the Indian government clearly understands whom are they talking to in the Trump administration if they want to talk to the United States. Now the big hope is that on 10th of January, Sergey Gore comes and takes over as the US ambassador to India in Delhi, and then people are hoping that Gore will be the one, because he still has access to Trump, that he will be the one who will provide a way out, and then some things will happen. But my fear is, firstly, I think Trump is his own person, whether it is Gore or anyone else. We don't know what makes them work. We don't know what made him work with Asim Munir. None of us have any clues. So we really can't predict. It is more and more that Indians are operating out of hope that something will happen. But I think that a lot of damage has already been done, as you said, to these labor-intensive industries. And my fear is that if we don't somehow fix it very quickly, we will have more damage and more permanent damage that will come in, and which will have implications on the rate of the rupee. We see rupee already going down. Rupee may go down further. India may have to spend even more to buy crude oil, and Jio may not be able to show you cricket matches because they are paying in dollars, and they want to, and their price has gone up, etc., etc. So many other things may happen.
Sushant was mentioning that we've been hearing the deal is coming, the deal is coming. We know Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal has been saying this. He started saying it even before the tariffs actually were in place. And like you mentioned earlier, you said that the Prime Minister and the External Affairs Minister were perhaps deluded into thinking that some personal friendship would mean that India is on good footing when it comes to Trump's announced tariffs and won't be seeing this reality. But my question was it in fact delusion, or is this a concerted attempt to try and mislead the Indian public? Because at least at the time when Piyush Goyal was saying it, it did seem rather clear that the deal was not going in a direction where we were going to see an answer anytime soon.
I wouldn't take statements by Piyush Goyal very seriously, quite frankly. All of this is, at the end of the day, I mean, he may be Commerce Minister, but everything is literally it's quite above his pay grade. And I think the fundamental thing to remember, of course, Modi would love to have a deal. He would love to have tariffs reduced and go back to status quo ante. No question about it, right? Because you're talking about a government that has, singularly failed to provide jobs over the last 10 years. And now you add to this now layoffs and stress in places like Tirupur, Surat, Kakinada, centers of all of these industries that you mentioned. It's not a good look. And you also need to remember, and we need to factor this in when we try to understand why it's proving so difficult for Mr. Modi to reach a deal. That you are dealing with a Mr. 240. You're dealing with a guy who won in the last election only 240 seats, right? So he knows that politically he's on a weak wicket. Whatever the bluster, whatever the impression the media may try to create, whatever the impression you may get from the string of state level victories of the BJP or the NDA, the fact is that Modi is not in a position where he can afford to pay the political price that will flow if he were to completely, and fully concede in the case of agriculture, for example, what Trump wants, right? So I think this is a major stumbling block that they try to get at it piecemeal. So thoda soybean kar liya, thoda GM corn for ethanol purposes, but that's not working. And as Sushant was saying, Trump wants you to, he wants you to, he wants to show the American public that he's got you down on your knees. And for a variety of reasons, Mr. Modi cannot afford that look, right? So this is the issue, and frankly, I don't know how long this is going to drag. There was a phone call between the two. I suspect that the dilution of nuclear liability, can't even call it dilution, the complete capitulation. In fact, I was going back and reading what Arun Jaitley wrote in 2013. When there was talk of diluting the nuclear liability law under the Manmohan Singh government, and he basically argued vigorously why strict liability for suppliers, which is what was there in the law, should not be jettisoned. And I wonder what he would have said if he was alive, today, because this government has simply, gone and binned all of that, and it's done it to appease America, right? So I think these are all elements of I think Modi trying to say, okay, what all can I put into this gift hamper for Trump, and hope that it will add up to enough for him to then relax things, on the tariff front. And also, what's not working for India is the when the 25% was imposed, the penal tariffs. The assumption was that somehow through the Alaska process or various other things, Trump is going to bring an end to the Ukraine-Russia war. Right? That's not happened. Until that happens, I don't see any easing of this pressure very easily. So yeah, Reliance has cut down dramatically. India may well have reduced its purchases on pressure, but Trump is not relenting yet. So I don't see an immediate end to this. And this now we can say with the benefit of hindsight, right? A lot of things, but it should have been clear to, like, what's Jaishankar's USP, right? He's supposed to be a guy who knows the US system inside out. He was a master there. He served in the embassy earlier. He was JS Americas for 2 or 3 years. Supposedly knows the Trump team. Trump was being pretty open about what he planned to do on the tariff front a couple of years before he was elected, right? So the pivot in Indian policy, now we talk about global South, Europe, Latin America, even China. If you had done a structured pivot so that you have more sort of eggs in the basket, you would have been in a better position. But you were so convinced that Indo-US relations are on a certain trajectory, and that they're on its trajectory because of you, because of your. I think Jaishankar refers to it as the +1 factor, the Modi personal touch factor. So you were working under this illusion. You didn't prepare the ground. You didn't prepare exporters. You didn't work on developing markets, and you pay the price now.
Well, as Siddharth said, just one more point to that. Sometimes, you wonder if Russia-Ukraine war is the real reason, because China has not been imposed with those tariffs. So the real reason may be the fact that the Mr. Modi is unwilling to confront Trump and acknowledge the Nobel Peace Prize that Mr. Trump should be getting instead of the FIFA Peace Prize that he got. So you can speculate that might be a much bigger reason than the so-called Russia, the Russia-Ukraine war, because the Turkey has not been imposed with those tariffs. China has not been imposed with the tariffs. China is a much bigger importer, and fundamentally, every country which has been able to deal with the United States, with the Trump administration, has something to leverage. What has India got to leverage? The Chinese came out with this rare earths thing and said, to hell with you, you are not getting rare earths now. What can India say that we will not give to you? We will not give shrimps. We will not give jewelry. What will we not give? People talk a lot about iPhone exports. Please remember that India's iPhone exports are barely 2% of the Chinese iPhone exports. India is still number 3. Vietnam exports more iPhones to the United States than India even now. And once the iPhone tariffs on China come down, India will again be struggling to export those iPhones. And India's iPhones are what? They're essentially assembling. You are importing more stuff from China, and you are assembling it and sending it. You're not really manufacturing it. So the weaknesses are in economy, the weaknesses are in manufacturing, the weaknesses in our politics. After 11 years now of Mr. Modi's government, we can see where India is. It has all come to the fore in various places, whether it is tariffs, manufacturing, export-oriented industries, jobs, social harmony. Of course, is at the forefront of it. We can very clearly see.
I mean, even if you assume, just to pick up a thread that you mentioned, even if you assume that Trump is acting out of pique, right? He says, "Oh, India's not you tried to fly close to the sun and you got singed." Right. So going and currying favor, landing up there in end of Jan, early Feb for no reason, nothing tangible. Then you create, I would say, a situation where the US, you pretty much invite the US to intervene. Right. So if you chose to respond to Pahalgam in a way that you were not able to sustain. Right. So I mean, people often say, "Oh, Trump is exaggerating." Let's not forget, news about the ceasefire was broken by Donald Trump on Twitter or Truth Social, right? So obviously he knew, and I don't think he knew because he tapped Narendra Modi's phone. He knew because his guys were involved in the whole process, right? So how much we would like to, no matter how much we try to deny, the fact is you created a situation which the Americans were very happy to take advantage of. So and then of course you realize you can't play that game, because for Modi to acknowledge that Trump brought about peace deflates the whole Pahalgam, ghar mein ghus ke mara wala narrative, right? So you can't do that. And then Pakistan runs away with the cream, right? So I'm saying that there is a wider folly here. Apart from misleading Trump, I think, in terms of, other parts of the puzzle also, you made, I think, wrong moves on this chessboard. And are in a sense the people of India are paying a price for it.
Can we see, there's one thing, we were saying that we have pummeled Pakistan during Op Sindoor, etc. But look at where Pakistan is. As Siddharth just said, Modi is getting invited to White House. They are being loved by the White House. Their tariff rates are lower than India. They have a strategic deal with Saudi Arabia. there was strategic agreement with Saudi Arabia where even nuclear cooperation is possible between the two sides. And really, if Indians were to target Pakistani nuclear assets or anything, the Saudis would intervene and say, no, you are taking away our defense umbrella, our strategic umbrella in that sense. And the Pakistanis still continue to remain very close to China. They're getting the top of the end military hardware from China. You are essentially 6 months down the line. Pakistan is in a sweet spot. India is in a much worse off. But let's also face it that Pakistan has always lost its winning hand. It has a history of having a winning hand and losing it due to overconfidence and overplaying it. And we should just hope that Pakistan will again make that blunder and make that mistake.
Sure, but in the aftermath of these tariffs, and as you were saying that Pakistan may have got a winning hand at this point, but the fact is that what is happening in India's neighborhood, China and Pakistan, we saw have joined hands during Operation Sindoor. There was enough evidence of that in the public domain. In Bangladesh, there is rising anti-India sentiment. In Nepal, we have seen that the Gen Z protests that broke out earlier this year, we saw the right-wing sentiment in India was calling it a conspiracy. So the question really is, at the end of the year, where do we stand among our neighbors, and do we really have any friends left?
One of the nicest things about Narendra Modi's inauguration in 2014, perhaps the only nice thing, was that he invited leaders of all South Asian neighbors, right, to come for the swearing in. And there was the promise in that invitation of India taking its South Asian policy seriously and building bridges and completing the sort of SARC had kind of run aground, and it was important to push that. And within a couple of years, the whole thing unraveled. First, India-Pakistan relations went nowhere. Then you had a crisis with Nepal, Sri Lanka, Maldives. With Bangladesh, the crisis was of another kind. You brought yourself so close to Sheikh Hasina and her authoritarian government that when the inevitable happened, as often happens when you have dictatorial regimes and people overthrew her, you are then stuck in a situation where you're playing host to a leader whom Bangladesh has now sentenced to death. They want you to extradite her. You have a situation now in Bangladesh where India is not, no matter which government gets elected, BNP or most likely BNP, you're going to be in a situation where you're in a way tainted by your earlier association with Sheikh Hasina and her dictatorial methods. Similarly, in Nepal, you have a situation now where new forces have emerged. Of course, the transition is a little bit will be, I think, less thoroughgoing in Nepal than it has been in Bangladesh. But Maldives, even Bhutan, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the China, Bhutan would like to negotiate with China on a border settlement. We are not so happy that they want to proceed, so things are being held back. So, in our neighborhood, India, does not have the kind of stature, does not have the kind of relationship that it ought to have. I'm, personally, it's inevitable if there's a vacuum, China will come, other players will come. This is going to happen. But I think, India needs to really take South Asia seriously as a region and have a well thought out, well implemented South Asian strategy that, in a sense is predicated on recognizing equality of all countries, big or small, prioritizing trade, prioritizing people-to-people contact. How do you have that when you have the Home Minister of this country referring to Bangladeshis as termites? So and this is when you had great relations with Sheikh Hasina. Your best friend in South Asia was the Prime Minister of Bangladesh, and you're calling her people termites, and that was also part of the backlash in the sense that one of the accusations against Hasina was that, look, how can you be such good friends with the government that is abusing your people, right? So I think the South Asian policy of the government has been a disaster, and this year has, in a sense, brought to the fore the fact that nature abhors a vacuum, and that if you have unpopular authoritarian governments or corrupt governments that are not delivering, then new forces are going to rise. And in Bangladesh, in Nepal, new forces, even I would say in a sense Sri Lanka. You have a government. Of course, India's relations with the Sri Lankan president and prime minister are perhaps the best in South Asia, arguably. Maldives also, there's been some restoration of balance, but the situation is not good in terms of the India-South Asia relationship.
Just to add to a couple of other countries which I did not mention, one is Afghanistan. I think you are treating Taliban as if that you desperately need Taliban. Let's face it, Taliban also needs you, and there are certain values which you can insist on Taliban. You do not want to insist on those values at all. Those bare minimum that should be done on women's rights, on women's health, on human rights, on democratic issues. You just don't want to insist on that. Taliban doesn't have many friends around. It desperately wants India on its side, and you should actually at least be talking about that. You don't want to talk about that, and primarily my view is you don't want to talk about that because you want to show Muslims as barbarians. You want to show Muslim as absolutely backward, absolutely people who don't deserve it, and that's why this is perfectly fine. This is happening on your west. Pakistan is, of course, its own turmoil. On your east, you have Myanmar, and you are still friendly with the junta. China is friendly with the junta, but China is also friendly with all the other ethnic groups. Other ethnic groups are giving it rare earths. You did not build any bridges. Now you are desperately trying to build some bridges with these ethnic groups who are fighting the military junta. You are treating. So nobody has seen Aung San Suu Kyi for last couple of years. She has not been in touch with her lawyers. Her sons have not seen her. Her son has actually gone out and said that I do not know whether my mother is even alive or not because there is no evidence. I'm not a great fan of Aung San Suu Kyi, but she's still better than the military. She's still better than the military junta. You are treating military junta as some kind of this thing. You want to deal with those kind of authoritarian regimes. And fundamentally, my belief is that the Hindutva politics is incompatible with the politics of a friendly South Asia, because Hindutva politics is premised on a Hindu Rashtra, which eventually then builds itself into an idea of an Akhand Bharat. If you put a mural in the new parliament building about Akhand Bharat, then the signal that you send to all your neighbors is that your sovereignty, your integrity does not really matter. We don't consider it sacrosanct. And as long as we have Hindutva politics in India, it cannot have friendly ties with other countries in South Asia. There will be fundamental issues with that. For example, Bangladesh. Tomorrow, let's say Sheikh Hasina's son becomes the prime minister, or whoever, Jamaat-e-Islami or some other force. Can they really go against the wishes of the people of Bangladesh and become friendly with India? The people of Bangladesh right now do not like this government, the Indian government at all. No democratically elected leadership can go against that massive popular sentiment to become friendly with India. You have lost the people in these countries. You have lost the people of Afghanistan who worked with you, people who studied here, people who worked for you, people who are ambassadors there. You have lost those people. I do not know what is the kind of vision that they have of South Asia. The idea that India will decide everything in South Asia is gone through the window. The United States has its own policy. China has its own policy. India really is not the. And if you want to be a great power, leading power, whatever term you may want to use, if you want to be a leading power, then you need to be respected in your region more than feared. You need to be respected. You are neither feared nor respected, nor do you have a plan for the future. So where are we? Where are we going in South Asia? South Asia is actually as much of India's domestic policy failure, as the United States or any other places.
One of the other big themes that people have talked about a lot this year has been the state of India's economy. And say you were to base your information purely off of PIB press releases, it would really seem like it's been fantastic. Poverty is at an all-time low, GDP growth is at an all-time high, everything is really even higher than hunky-dory. But there have been several indicators that do not go along with that narrative. There's the state of the rupee, as you mentioned earlier. Yesterday, it closed at more than 91. That's a number we've never seen before. To put things in perspective, 15 years ago in 2015, it was around 65. When Mr. Modi was elected for the second term in 2019, it was around 74. And from there, it is now at 91. In addition, we've on the GDP numbers, we've recently seen the IMF support what several Indian economists have been saying for a while, which is that India's GDP data is not trustworthy, and several of the other statistics released by the government around the economy are unreliable. IMF has given India a C grade on this matter. So I wanted to ask both of you, what is your take on how India's economy is performing?
So I'll give you two indicators which have just come to the fore. India says its economy grew by 8% recently. I was reading Menaka Doshi in the Bloomberg. She says that there is a big dichotomy that the power growth, consumption of power in this period when India's economy has grown by 8% is 0.9%. Now that is not compatible. The usual factor is 0.9. If your economy is growing by 0.8%, your power growth has to be somewhere in the range of 7% or somewhere 6.5 to 7%. So clearly there's an incompatibility here. The second thing is India's tax collection. If your GDP is growing by 8%, then your tax collection should be growing. You are actually missing your tax targets this year. So this leads me to what used to be called the Li Qiang index in China, where the Chinese premier had gone out and said, while the official GDP numbers are one side, I have my own indices by looking at power, by looking at taxes, by looking at other means to decide how the economy is doing. So while the headline GDP numbers, or as the economists love to call it, the print numbers, are great, there are question marks about how valid these numbers are and how accurate these numbers are. Of course, the IMF has given 3 or 4 reasons. One is that you're using a base which is 2010, 2011, which is an older base. But I think even more important is you are using the data of your formal business establishments and projecting onto your informal business establishments, whereas your informal business establishments have completely been, they do not reflect in any way. There is no parallel with your formal business statements, and therefore your consumption side data and your accounts data, the mismatches now huge. So those 3-4 factors very clearly show that the Indian GDP growth perhaps is not as high as is being projected. I saw on the wire Arun Kumar talk about, by his view, it was 4% or something that India was perhaps growing at. So my fundamental point is that if you look at things like power consumption, if you think like things like tax collection, clearly there are at least question marks about India's official GDP data, and which is what we can feel from the anecdotal evidence that we see around us, the state of economy, the way people are doing, the state of jobs, rural incomes, etc. You can clearly see a kind of a very depressive kind of an environment here in economic terms. The only thing which is rising is the profits for certain section of businesses. Wealth inequality has risen, income inequality has risen.
Recent report said India is one of the
Most unequal places in the world. Please do not forget that we are almost at par with apartheid South Africa now. And people talk about apartheid South Africa as like an outlier. Now we are one of those outlier countries. So corporates are making more profits. Your rich people are getting richer, and they are accumulating more wealth. And clearly, this is an outcome of what we have seen in those years. And the GDP growth, yes, it remains a question mark. And when people like Bloomberg and others, or a Financial Express edit start asking these questions, that if the GDP is growing by 8%, why is tax collection not growing, or why is power consumption not growing? Then I think there are questions which go well beyond what the Wire or Siddharth or I or you or Jahnavi are asking.
Yeah. So one of the other big concerns around this issue has, of course, been of employment. And again, official employment statistics aren't showing a big change, but the kind of things we're seeing, the large-scale protests around recruitment exams, for example, the allegations of people leak, the sheer number of people who apply for very few positions, there's that. Then there's also the quality of jobs that we're seeing. We're seeing, like Sushant said, the informal sector is still extremely, extremely large. Gig work is at an all-time high. And official policy too has been criticized. The new labor codes, the 4 labor codes that have been brought in, they've been criticized for, siding with employers over India's working millions who are really not facing a very safe or secure future. So how do you view the status of employment in the country?
I mean, this is the other side of people. I mean, the other side of Hindutva is the pursuit of, I mean, if Hindu Rashtra is one part of the coin, the other part of the coin is the pursuit of economic policies that are going to enrich the largest corporations and to hell with what happens to the broad masses of people, right? So you're seeing this very clearly, in terms of the way contracts are being awarded, the cronyism that is very evident, the way in which public sector financial institutions like LIC are being pressed into, deploying their vast resources in, for corporate investments, and the fact is that these guys are not willing to invest their own resources. So the amount of gross fixed capital formation, other ways in which you can measure, the willingness of a firm to actually expand. All of that tells you that there is no actual growth. And if you don't have actual growth, in terms of creation of new production capacities. Where are the jobs going to come from? So the jobs are these gig work, where the the precarity of employment, of working hours, the amount of money they make at the end of the month, all of this has created new levels of desperation, right? And so I think that and this is the Achilles heel of the Modi government. At the end of 10 years, 11 years now, it's very clear that the singular failure to create jobs. And you can go back and listen to the promises that Mr. Modi made of 1 crore jobs a year or 2 crore jobs a year. That simply hasn't happened. From time to time, they keep wheeling out EPFO data to say we've got so many new recruits in EPFO and ESI. But the fact is that you are not creating jobs at the level at which you need to, and so this is something which I think renders the government politically vulnerable, and they're trying every which way to divert the attention of people into you know, different kinds of disputes, arguments, and so on. But at the end of the day, no matter what statistics you come up with, you can't hide the fact that you aren't creating jobs, and you aren't creating quality jobs.
2 points to what Siddharth said, absolutely, absolutely correctly. One is that the official data actually is, if I'm not wrong, is 1 hour of paid or unpaid work in last 30 days. That's paid or unpaid work. And the second point which you should not remember is that India's employment in agriculture has actually increased, which essentially means that this is just underemployment and unemployment being masked. Second, when women force start coming back into workforce at a lower strata, not at the corporate structure. When we think of women, we think of people working professionally. No, when people start helping in farmlands or in very, very small family or businesses, you are clearly showing a kind of a distress and a kind of lack of employment. So India's employment numbers are looking good because a lot of women are now employed a lot more people are employed in agriculture, and a lot of people are employed as an unpaid worker. I think Rukmani had put out the data showing that how many of these MSMEs are, I think 70% are just a single person MSMEs. They're not actually employing anyone. So this is just somebody maybe running a very small small business. So when you actually interrogate these numbers of official employment, which even the government of India itself is putting out, CMI data is much more better because it's a private data. But these official numbers are not great. And we talk about demographic dividend. India's demographic dividend is going to go down because our population growth rate is now going to be less than 2.1 at below the subsistence level. Is already below subsistence level. So clearly, you got another 15 to 20 years before the demographic dividend runs out, and your demographic dividend is being used, as you said, in having security guards in high rises and having these gig workers all over the place, which is not what the bulk of India's youth should be doing, working for
And export of labor, like you now have
yeah.
for example, the agreements that India signed with Israel, and I mean, like, there is a
Russia also
concerted effort to
somehow send people.
so for a government which has prided itself on a Naya Bharat and so on, to openly admit in this way that you're just not able to give jobs, and you're going to encourage people to go out and sending them to often dangerous places. This is I can't think of a more open admission of.
How bad a situation is when you are actually creating a cell inside the Union Home Ministry saying that all the demobilized Agnibis from this year would be given employment as security guards, and we are going to coordinate with state governments to give them a job as security guards. Now, this is a nightmare scenario where you have people who are serving as soldiers being told to act as security guards, and we all know how security guards are treated, at least in North and West India. What the dignity of labor in that job is. So we've really, we've taken away, as Siddharth said, we've taken away dignity of labor. We are not providing anybody a roadmap for the future. We are actually where, that's why people are willing to run away, jumping across seas and getting onto boats through donkey routes or whatever. It's a very, very depressing and a very challenging scenario, and I don't think people are paying adequate attention to it. You can have youth dancing in front of the mosques and shouting slogans and doing stuff, but that's not going to take India forward.
Well, all this is happening on the economic front. There's no conversation about it when we talk about elections, which the BJP and its allies in the NDA have continued to win. This year started with the elections in Delhi, which the BJP won after a couple of decades. And then we had the year closing with the NDA winning with a huge majority in Bihar. But the question is that when one goes on the ground to all these places and you ask people, what are your issues? The first and foremost thing that they will tell you is unemployment, महंगाई or बेरोजगारी. But these issues don't seem to resonate in terms of the election outcomes that we are seeing. So what really is happening?
Look, I think election. I mean, people's concerns are unemployment, but if I was an unemployed person in Bihar, am I going to trust Tejashwi's promise of giving me a job over Nitish Kumar? I don't know. Like in the sense that some people may, some people not. The fact is that people have got used to the idea that governments are not going to transform their lives, and I think that they end up voting on very narrow considerations. I happen to believe that in the case of Bihar, the 10,000 rupee so-called, and in fact that was packaged as
Gift.
employment, right? It was just a handout, but it was packaged as some kind of employment supplement, right? So to build business, complete nonsense, right? And you give 10,000 and then you dangle the promise that if we get re-elected, maybe you will get 2 lakhs, right? So people then go for that, right? So better to have bird in the hand than two in the bush. So why people vote, I think, is a very complicated, complex issue. In the case of Bihar, certainly questions can be raised about the integrity of the poll process, the SIR, the Rural Election Commission. All of these are factors, right? But and this is not for the first time, right? I mean, unemployment has always been an issue, but people have not always voted, uh, voted for leaders or parties that have a coherent set of policies aimed at generating employment.
But the interesting contrast, I would say, is that the previous government, the UPA government, in a sense, fell also because of this huge issue of corruption and also because the economy was not doing well. There was a lot of conversation about the falling rupee and all of that, which is not a conversation now at all. So, what really is happening in terms of the I want to understand the thought process behind this, where just 10 years ago, perhaps this was a huge conversation starter, and now it's not a mover at all.
So I think there are two factors. One is the role of India's big media. Let's not forget that India's big media, which is dominated by a particular gender, particular Hindu caste elite group, clearly has empathy, sympathizes with the government, and is not willing to put out any headlines where they would remind that the rupee is. How many newspapers today ran the headline that rupee is below 91? When the same rupee was falling in the UPA era, these were page one headlines. And how many people are reminding what Mr. Modi was saying when rupee was 60, when rupee went down to 60 rupees, that rupee is not going down because of any weaknesses, only going down because of the weakness of the government in Delhi. So you have big media helps create a narrative which then shifts the discourse. In the big media in India currently does not want to challenge that. And my belief is they come from a kind of a socioeconomic structure where they are clearly aligned to a great degree by the politics of the current dispensation. Whatever they may say over coffee with people like you, me, or Siddharth about being these great liberals, they are essentially not liberals if we see what they're doing, what they're very clearly doing. And without so see, opposition's job is always to criticize. If BJP was in the opposition, it would always criticize and say Congress is doing this, Congress is doing that poorly. It is only when the big media starts saying this, that is when people start saying, okay, this guy is to blame. Right now, big media is a cheerleader for Mr. Modi. Big media wants you to believe that pollution, Mr. Modi would fix the pollution. It is just because of Nehru or whatever. So the big media's role we should not undermine. Big media is an important pillar in what happens. Essentially, the missing political accountability which you're talking about. Who can fix that political accountability? Opposition parties will always criticize whoever is in opposition. You will only get it when the big media starts, or the people whom are more seen as more trustworthy, more neutral, start saying this and start linking it to the question of political accountability. Without that, political accountability will not get fixed. And this is not true of India. This is true of Russia. This is true of Hungary. This is true of Turkey. This is true of the Trump administration. There's a reason why President Trump is going after CNN, which went after CNBC. This is true everywhere. This new generation of authoritarians globally, and this has been written about extensively, have found a way in which they can control the people's minds by controlling the big media completely. And in India's case, we have seen with these ratings, we have seen with this Reuters report, we have seen with everywhere. Siddharth and I have been on panels, we are working on a project together where we have seen how the big media has been completely tamed, where this question of political accountability to their problems, to their grievances, economic grievances, are just not there. The linkage has been broken.
Can I just add one thing? Because, I think he's made a valuable point, and I think viewers should understand that, it's not that we're saying that people need the media to tell them how bad things are.
Yeah.
People know how bad things are.
Linkage.
I think in 2014, people knew that the government is that there's serious allegations of corruption, economy is slowing down, ye wo. People are always ready to change, right? Ready for change. The role of the media becomes crucial in selling a candidate, selling a dream, selling a vision to the public. And I think you saw in I would say from that process began from probably 2012 onwards.
2011-12.
When big businessmen, big business leaders, and then big sections of media began to champion this idea that you have Modi, Gujarat model. So this big myth was created that here you have a leader who is new, visionary, who has radical ideas about the economy. So people didn't need convincing that we have to vote against Manmohan. People needed convincing that Modi is the answer, and media sold that message in a huge way. Today, I don't think people in Bihar or Delhi need convincing that Modi is not delivering. But there is lack of conviction about what is the alternative. And here the media is actually, for example, constantly lampooning the opposition, trying to project them as a dissolute, dissonant, disunited bunch who's incapable of governing. So I think this also preys on people's minds. Because at the end of the day, people, want to know, okay, I'm voting against Modi or Nitish, whoever I'm voting for. And if the media has kind of kept up a certain barrage of propaganda that, you're then worried, okay, am I going from the frying pan into the fire? So I think that's where the role of the biases of the media become decisive.
Yeah, but I also want to add, come to you on this, the fact that that you're saying that the media is obviously has a role in demonizing the opposition and putting it down, but the question is also on the opposition, that it's not blame free, in that there is a whole ground open for it to exploit and build a narrative like the BJP did from 2012 onwards, as Siddharth is saying. But right now, for a variety of reasons, it can be a propaganda media on one hand, and the other side, the inner party issues that they have, or differences among the alliances. What is stopping the opposition from kind of using this fertile ground to build on people's issues like governance issues, economic issues, which are clearly resonating with people?
So clearly there are opposition parties which are able to successfully do it. DMK is able to successfully do it. Congress was able to successfully do it in Karnataka, where they came with a big majority. Was able to do it in Telangana. Particularly we see, or even in Himachal Pradesh. Particularly we see this problem in North and West India, particularly in states like Uttar Pradesh and very recently in Bihar and Madhya Pradesh. And even in Uttar Pradesh, we saw during the 2024 Lok Sabha election that the opposition was able to do slightly better. So there is no question that there are weaknesses with the opposition, with their organization, with their management, with their leadership structures, with the way they can include people. But even a party like Aam Aadmi Party, which was seen to be this very very agile, very modern, very IT centric party, even they lost Delhi. Even they lost Delhi in a sense. So there could be structural factors. There could be factors like social structures. Some of the numbers, if you look at the rate at which Hindu upper caste are voting for the BJP now in Bihar, the numbers that I'm sure you have seen are 85 to 86%, which is what more than even the Muslims who vote for any major opposition party. So you clearly have a very distinct kind of a control over wealth, control over intellectual capital, which is very heavily in support of the BJP, which is not even preferring AAP in Delhi. Forget the parties like the Congress or the left parties, or even the socialist parties. This is not to say that the opposition parties are blame free, but my sense is that opposition parties are playing at an unlevel playing field with the election commission that you have, with the Supreme Court you have. You know what the Supreme Court did in Maharashtra. to allow the NDA government to come into power when Chandrachud was still the Chief Justice. So the whole unlevel playing field makes it very difficult. In any case, the parties are not that strong. Look at the difference in the kind of money that the BJP is able to raise vis-a-vis what other parties have. Look at anybody who wants to give money to an opposition gets a phone call from someone. Is always scared of going to ED. You work at an independent produced platform. I'm sure you know that people who want to give you money are scared that they would get a call from someone in the government. So we live in this kind of an environment where the playing field is not level, where the whole thing is unbalanced, and where the opposition definitely has weaknesses, but those weaknesses get magnified, and those weaknesses become much bigger. Which leader in India's history has actually walked the length and breadth of the country like Rahul Gandhi? And at any other time, people would have said that, oh, if somebody walks down from Kanyakumari to Kashmir, this would be like it would bring a revolution. Boss, this is a country where it made only a partial difference to the Lok Sabha election. Lok Sabha election results. Because again, I didn't see newspapers running with headlines saying this. People were always trying to diminish the impact of even that yatra. I personally thought that was a superhuman effort. No, even during India's independence struggle, nobody walked from the length and the breadth of the country.
So I would say that if you look at, there are major weaknesses in the leadership structure, leadership style, organizational structure, the ideological, ideopolitical stance of virtually every opposition party. Even DMK, which is politically successful, is not blame free or trouble free. I think there are major issues, allegations of corruption, for example. I think that the challenge that Vijay poses in Tamil Nadu, if he gets his alliances right, you could have quite an upset in the Vidhan Sabha elections there next year. So Bengal, of course, Mamta is pretty strong, secure, but I would say that if you look at the Congress rules in Karnataka, but the sheer indecisiveness. Why is the Siddaramaiah versus Shiv Kumar
allowed to play out?
Problem allowed to fester and play out? Yeah. Take a decision one way or the other, right? But don't letting it linger. So there's this. I think the fact that you have different power structures, power centers. So you have Kharge Sahab, who is the president of the Congress, but Rahul Gandhi is the sort of power behind the throne. Sonia Gandhi is the power behind the throne. Priyanka Vadra is another sort of power center. So this indecisiveness of the party, its inability to deal with clashing egos, clashing ambitions. You saw it in Haryana also. So yes, we will always there will always be unlevel playing fields. There will always be money problems. There will always be biased election commission and so on and so forth. But why do you add to your problems by the lack of organizational clarity, lack of decisive leadership? So I think Congress needs to get its act together. I think the Samajwadi Party in UP, the PDA, people say is on a strong wicket, but they are still we are under 3 years now, a little bit over 3 years till the next Lok Sabha election. The work has to begin now if they want to really make an impact. So I would say it's one can take comfort from all the other factors that Sushant mentioned, which are true. But at the end of the day, you are right. I mean, the parties also have to share a certain sense of responsibility.
I'll give you another example. You were in Bihar, you covered Bihar. Prashant Kishore, now, who's a much, the modern politics, who runs everything, has got a lot of money, smart guy, is credited with winning so many elections. How did he perform? He walked he traveled the whole of Bihar, did everything, selected candidates, was not short of money, did everything. Performed very poorly. I don't have the answer. I don't have the answer.
First election, I think we're being a little unfair to compare him with the Congress. And
no, I'm saying compare with the Congress. I'm saying Sushant Kishore was supposed to be this genius who could do anything, who could do magic. And so difference between running a political consultancy and running a party and political party comes to the fore in that sense. What I'm saying is that while of course, as Siddharth said, there are weaknesses, but we should also recognize that they are operating in an environment where those weaknesses get magnified and played out much more than what it does. BJP could not elect a national president for 3 years.
Even now, they haven't really elected.
They haven't really got a president. Nobody cared. When there's a fight going on in the NDA between Maharashtra, how many front page headlines have you seen where Shinde's son is criticizing the BJP Maharashtra president on a daily basis? They are abusing each other. It is not on any front page headlines. Karnataka is on all page headlines. Karnataka, the Karnataka BJP leader has gone again after this chap's son, the state party president. But you won't get those headlines at all.
I would add, the confused messaging. Like you were in Bihar. I think vote chori as an issue at a sort of meta political level was important, right?
Yeah.
To tell the election commission that, look, we have data to show that you guys are biased, and to the extent to which it forces the election commission on the back foot and forces them to be a little bit less unfair than they might otherwise have been, good thing. But to try to convert vote chori into a vote winning issue, how does that work?
So
you're telling somebody to vote for me, but aapki vote chori hone wali hai.
Therefore, it had no resonance on the ground.
No,
because
also
that cannot
political
be...
mobilization requires, as Siddharth said, it requires organization, it requires connects with social groups, which is essentially, you can have an issue, like you said, unemployment or whatever issue that might be, or vote chori or whatever that issue is, to be able to relate it to a local group with which has its own specific, ethnic or cultural resonance or social resonance or caste resonance. You need to have people in the organization who can translate it to that local group, and that is what political activity is. That is what political organizations do. It is not the meta narrative which wins you the election. Your organization's ability to go and translate those big messages into those particular social groups, and I think that is where the opposition parties clearly do not have the organizational abilities or the ability within their workers to translate those big messages which are specifically applicable to a group, which BJP is able to do well, even like putting up a statue of some local caste group leader, and they have workers who can go and talk to those groups, EBC groups, who can say, look, we have given you respect because you have put a statue of those kind of things. And I think that weakness is definitely.
And because we're speaking about vote chori, an important development this year was also the fact that the Election Commission is conducting the special intensive revision of the electoral rolls, which has, in a sense, become a citizenship testing drive. So the Election Commission's power to test citizenship was once settled by the Supreme Court, but now the BJP is in a sense telling us that this is going to weed out illegal immigrants and voters from India's electoral rolls. Now, do you see this as this development in India in 2025, where the Election Commission is conducting this citizenship verification drive? Is this the realization of an ideological project of the BJP, where the Election Commission is just being used to further that end?
I think there's two things happening here, two or three things. I think there is some systematic attempt to fiddle with the electoral rolls. I'm convinced about it. I think the whole manner in which the SIR was conceived and pushed at the breakneck speed, suggests that dal mein kuch kala hai. We've seen not just anecdotal evidence, but documentation of the way in which deletions have happened in different states. And I think that deleting certain voters, adding certain voters is probably an attempt to secure tactical advantages in certain constituencies. So even if it's not happening at the statewide level, at a macro level, but I think you win advantages in certain key contests. But the political, even if the aim is not to, because at the end of the day in Bihar, we didn't weed out any foreigners, did they? I mean, the numbers were really inconsequential. But you're spreading a message of panic to the public at large, that India is beset with illegal immigrants, termites, whatever language you use, infiltrators, and that this needs to be curbed in some way. And I think this political function is what the SIR is doing.
Yeah, so essentially, SIR, clearly my fundamental problem is that the trust with the Election Commission, with whatever it is doing, of course, there are huge question marks. Yogendra Yadav has done some calculations and shown that even 20% of the voters, our numbers are coming under question because of the SIR process. My bigger problem is that once the Election Commission loses the trust of the people, or is not seen as a neutral arbiter or as a neutral umpire, then the whole democratic question comes into play. Then, all elections, all results become questionable. And even for someone like Mr. Modi or Mr. Amit Shah, who may want to win with handsome numbers, not get 240 or get whatever 400 or 500 or whatever that they wish to get those numbers may become inconsequential because people may stop trusting what those numbers are. One of the big advantages that India has, and Ornit Shani has a great book on this, how India became democratic on the 1952 elections, how the 1952 elections were conducted and why they were so significant in difference. And that says they set India on a kind of a path where the elections had their problems, but they were not like fundamental problems of trust or trusting the results. I think we are walking into a territory where we are very close to entering that very dangerous territory where people start saying that the elections are not only free and fair, the results are no longer trustworthy. And that's a territory which I don't want India to get into. If that's the territory we get into, then we are seriously questioning India's whole democratic past of last 75, 70, 76 years.
One of the reasons why the SIR also caused so much stress and anguish was because just earlier this year, we saw this very targeted and large-scale drive against Bengali-speaking migrant workers, a large number of whom were Muslim, but also some Hindus. Under the Union Home Ministry's directions, all of these people, despite having Aadhaar cards, ration cards, often other forms of identification, were labelled Bangladeshi immigrants and detained in very large numbers in big cities, in Delhi, in Bombay, in other places. And then in Assam, we saw an even darker side of this, where people were literally pushed across the border into Bangladesh. Not even people who were trying to enter at the time. These are people who have been living in India, have families in India, and were taken to the border by security forces, and in some cases in the water, or in some cases over the land border, literally pushed into another country. We saw this happening, this intense burst of this happening, and then it stopped. But still, that bogey of undocumented immigrants taking over our jobs, our votes, our elections, everything continues. The Home Minister continues to raise it. Other political leaders do. So what explains all of this?
I mean, you remember the Jharkhand elections a couple of years ago, right? The BJP tried its damnedest to scare people into, getting worried about quote unquote infiltration, and particularly tribal seats. Didn't work, right? But they are relentless. I mean, the idea is that you spread fear about the fact that foreigners are taking over, and obviously this propaganda is going to be most effective in states that are the closest to Bangladesh, right? So Assam is one place, West Bengal is another place. It didn't stretch as far uh, as Jharkhand. Clearly, I don't think it really worked in Bihar either. This rule by fear psychosis is what these deportations that you mentioned are aimed at promoting. In terms of the actual numbers, where but you're talking of hundreds, perhaps a thousand, couple of thousands. You're not talking of lakhs of crores, right? So the numbers are really aimed at telling the sort of Hindu public that look at us, BJP, we are serious about this. This is a serious threat to all of you. We are taking action. You can see this particularly in Assam, for example, where the chief minister is very visibly trying to stoke public fears about this. So it's this political messaging essentially. It's very dangerous, obviously, and it's led to tragedies at the personal level, as we've seen in the case of Sunila Khatun and other individual cases, some of which have come up to the Supreme Court, and where the government is now objecting to the media reports about it, saying that, oh, you're misleading the public. But the fact is that you have been catching hold of Indian Bengalis, labeling them Bangladeshi, pushing them across the border without any kind of due process. It's very, very dangerous politics. So, somewhere down the line, I think this also shows the desperation of the BJP. You are trying to, concoct issues out of nowhere. So in Bihar, the big fear was lots of foreigners. SIR found hardly any. Somewhere down the line, we need to read this as also the insecurity of the BJP, that you're clutching at straws. You can't win elections on the basis of any positive, so you're going to raise in Bengal or elsewhere Vande Mataram, all kind of bogus issues that have nothing to do with the daily lived experiences of people.
And over and beyond what Siddharth said, taking off from there, it also fits in with the larger ideological project. The whole Savarkar idea of that India belongs only to Hindus, and it does not. Muslims do not belong here, or Christians do not belong here. And I think this is in line with this larger ideological aim of depicting Muslims as infiltrators, Muslims as illegal occupants, and clearly Muslims who are going to stay in India. In the so-called Hindu Rashtra would go in with the Savarkar idea of being a second-grade citizen, not having the same rights and being at the mercy of this thing. I see this as a project of I see this as part of a project of creation of a de facto, if not a de jure Hindu Rashtra, where the Muslims are always under pressure, where Muslims are illegal, where Muslims are not given the same rights as Hindus. So while it is instrumental, it is also in line with their larger ideological perspective, which Savarkar very clearly laid out in his books.
You said that this is perhaps a sign of desperation, of insecurity, and so I want to talk a little bit about the more bread and butter issues that perhaps these rhetorical claims are meant as a distraction for, because we've seen quite a lot of tragedies this year. crowd management has been a big issue. We've seen 8 big stampedes. There have been at least 127
Starting
deaths.
with the Kumbh, right?
There was
Yeah,
the one at the
Mahakumbh,
Kumbh.
yeah.
There was the one at the New Delhi railway station right after. There's been one during IPL celebrations in Bangalore, during in Orissa, during the political rally in Karur. Several of these. Then again, there's been flooding and landslides in the mountain region during the monsoons, which has led to deaths. There was the big tragic Air India crash that led to 241 people dying. And there's the air pollution. I mean, Delhi gets talked about a lot, but it's across the country. The WHO guidelines for PM 2.5, there's not a single district in the entire country that meets them. Is it fair to look at all of these as failures of governance?
No, 100%. I mean, like one of the slogans that Modi came up with in 2014, right, was minimum government, maximum governance. Right? He excels in these kind of little jumlas, and this jumla had a kind of certain resonance with people because people want maximum governance, right? You've got the opposite. I mean, you have unbreathable air. I'm in a sense showing the. I'm conceding that I'm showing the.
No, I also see.
the,
I'm carrying a 95.
the ill effects of this. You have in Kashmir there were issues with the kind of water that was coming into people's homes. You have inability to manage crowds, collapsing roads, bridges collapsing, the whole Indigo Airlines fiasco, where at one level it's clearly the fault of the airline, but at another this is a failure of proper regulation, right? So the regulators did not know in advance on the week that these regulations are finally going to kick in, that the airline was simply not prepared, right? And they had filed all their plans in advance, right? So yeah, I mean, Modi has actually created maximum government because you have the kind of usurpation of powers and authorities that we see happening, the empowering of government agencies. You can't DHL cannot deliver a book, a review copy of a book to a media office without us going through several layers of KYC, because now this is what the government wants delivery companies to do. So they've added bureaucracy, they've made ease of government, they've reversed ease of government on lots of fronts, and you're not delivering on basic simple things like clean air.
No, what can one say? I think the failure of governance is visible, and the more we see these tamashas and these gimmicks, and these circuses, they're very clearly an indicator that they are unable to deliver on those basics, and therefore they need to continuously come up with these distractions. Some of these distractions may be part of a larger ideological game plan, as with the temple and the flag hoisting, but some of the gimmicks that go around it with the videos and social media and the IT cell and what all goes on around clearly is in a certain sense an implicit acknowledgement that they need to distract people away from some of these issues. Otherwise, people will start talking about AQI and air and crowding and stampedes. So you need to continuously give them distraction. And one of the things which I see in political reportage about Mr. Modi is, and even recently when he met the MPs, is he's going after his own MPs for not being more active on social media. And I'm like, really? Are MPs supposed to be more active on social media? And does that constitute as good politics? But perhaps that constitutes a manner in which they can keep the people distracted more and more, rather than talking about issues of poor governance, which after 11 and a half years are very, very clearly visible. In 2014, not only minimum government, maximum governance, but also Achhe Din. Are these Achhe Din? Sitting in Delhi, are these Achhe Din?
You saw the statement of the Delhi Chief Minister, right, where she's referring to AQI की temperature है, and that इस temperature को कम करने का एक ही तरीका है कि पानी डालो. I mean, you're looking, she's talking, what she's saying is how do you artificially reduce the count, the measure. So you put, and we've seen all those videos of those water trucks going around in the place where they have these meters.
So Siddharth, you put AQI meters in only areas which are very green. You don't put in areas which are really populated, particularly in North Delhi, etc. You just don't put the AQI meters there. Secondly, the parameters by which you judge AQI are completely faulty. They should have been revised in 2000. They were formulated in 2009. Were supposed to be revised some 6 to 7 years back. WHO has moved far forward on how AQI is measured. The global marker.
We're saying we have our own measure now.
We have our own measure. The global measure for WHO for PM 2.5 is 5. We are talking about 5. Right now, must be in Delhi, must be 600 or 700. And the government of India has not changed its parameters. It doesn't want to talk about that. And what watering does is reduces PM 10, which is more visible. PM 2.5 just does not get reduced by sprinkling water. But you essentially somehow want to reduce the count, and then you cap it at 500, and then you average it under that. and then you give a daily average. If you're going to give me a daily average, then why are you capping it at 500? It just makes no sense, other than you're just trying to somehow artificially suppress the number and say that things are not bad. And this is not, we're not talking about developed countries. Look at Southeast Asia. Bangkok shuts down when AQI is 100. Countries, Jakarta shuts down at similar numbers, I think 100 or 120. It's a health emergency. In India, at 1,000, it's not a health emergency. Like, what are we talking about? We're not even talking about San Francisco or Dublin or Prague or or New York. We're talking about other equivalent countries, not equivalent, but countries in our region, in other Asian countries.
But none of this has found any mention in Parliament, or one could say little to no mention in Parliament, where the whole year has seen the government bulldozing bills even till the winter session, where we saw surprise bills in the form of the one to replace Narega being brought about, and special sessions were sought on the Pahalgam terror attack or even Operation Sindoor, but that did not take place. Instead, we saw over 10 hours being devoted to Vande Mataram, which in fact everybody is already agreed upon, so one doesn't know what was there to discuss for 10 hours. But the question I want to ask is that after another year of another round of bulldozing and the government going my way or the highway, is there any coming back for our parliament?
The Parliament, the way the BJP treats Parliament as a place for theatre. They were doing this right from 2014 and pushing through bills. One had assumed or hoped that given the 2024 result, the huge increase in the number of opposition MPs, that you would have something more effective by way of a chamber where issues can be debated. I am told by some MPs that we should not be too harsh. That don't judge Parliament by what you see on the cameras in the House, but a lot of serious work goes on in the committees. I'm sure some serious work goes on in the committees, but a lot of what comes out of the committees at the end of the day simply ends up rubber stamping what the government wants. And I wonder if some of these bills are actually going to, which need important bills, like the Narega one you mentioned, the so-called Shanti. I've forgotten what it even stands for, but anyway, the nuclear bill, sustainable whatever. These need to go and be discussed in committees. And so I think that if Parliament were to properly debate, even if the government has a majority and can railroad things through at the end of the day, but at least there should be a discussion, a public airing of concerns, and you don't have that.
So it's a part of a larger institutional decline that we see across institutions. I can give the example of Standing Committee on Defense. Why is that not discussed the India-China border crisis or Operation Sindoor? Where else in the world would a parliamentary standing committee would be discussing dresses or indigenization or some such thing? Other than parliamentary standing committees which are chaired by opposition leaders, most of the standing committees which are chaired by ruling alliance members, and they really choose topics which have nothing to do with anything which is of relevance or which would embarrass the government in sense. And Parliament is not alone. Institutions like the CAG. How many reports has the CAG produced? How many reports have you heard from the CAG coming out? All these other institutions, Supreme Court of India is of course is very visible, and we see that most of these institutions have been, in a sense, for want of a better word, been brought under the thumb of the executive, and the executive completely continues to dominate these democratic institutions. And as Siddharth said, this is something which doesn't bode well for the future.
All right, and before we end, let's also talk about the impact that movies have had this year in 2025. It's been, as one could say, with Parliament, also with movies, another year, another round of propaganda with Hindi movies churning out one after the other, and the year ending with Dhurandhar, which has really divided opinions all around. But at the same time, other movies like Homebound got limited audiences. Another movie on caste-based discrimination, Santosh, did not even get a release, while the Kerala International Film Festival has had the union government telling the film festival what it can and what it cannot show. So the question really is that if culture is a mirror to our times, are we in a post-truth world where violence, misogyny, toxic nationalism, hyper-nationalism is what is selling and is making money, and therefore it is being churned out again and again?
So, I think there are bright spots like the Malayalam cinema. I would, rather than looking at Dhurandhar, I actually see even the most biggest Indian hit, Hindi film hit, doesn't get more than 3 crore footfalls, and there are a lot of repeat viewers on that. So 3 crore in a population of 150 crore is not really that much. As you said, whether it is Dhadak 2, whether it is Santosh, whether it is Homebound, whether it is Shamsuddin Ki Family, there are a large number of other films, other films which have done well. There are bright spots like the Malayalam cinema which have done well, and it is a fact that the Bollywood, and particularly the main big players in Bollywood, have been completely enthralled of the ruling ideology and the ruling establishment. And this is not the first time. We have seen Kashmir Files earlier. We've seen the Kerala Files earlier. There are other films which have set the path. Or the same director who made Dhurandhar made Uri, which was again a big hit, earned 350 crores or something. So this has been a trend for some years now. Dhurandhar particularly has been, I think, more gory, more vicious. I've not seen the movie. I should not be commenting on it. But what is more worrisome about Dhurandhar is the way critics have been targeted, and I think that is where it is part of this larger picture of all the criticism of the ruling establishment or the ideology of the ruling establishment. Whether it comes from Omar Khalid, or whether it comes from journalists, whether it comes from academics, whether it comes from someone else, that targeting is what we have seen for the first time in Dhurandhar, where Anupama Chopra had to take down her review of the video of her review of the film at Hollywood Reporter India. Hollywood Reporter India. This is unprecedented. The kind of targeting that women reviewers have had to face, the kind of targeting reviewers like Rahul Desai and Uday Bhatia have had to face, that has been completely unprecedented. And more like, if you critique a film, or if you review a film like this, probably you will be next behind bars, like many of the academics and activists.
Speaking of people who dissent and perhaps say things that the establishment doesn't want them to, one area where we perhaps have been seeing that culturally is in comedy. And we saw how, early this year, Kunal Kamra's comedy, the club he was performing at, was vandalized and attacked. The show was disrupted. And he has since not been able to have a public show in India. Siddharth, what is happening?
Look, Jahnavi, there is an unprecedented attack uh, on creativity in India. I think if you are a cultural creator, whether you make a movie, whether you're a lyricist, you're a poet, you're an artist, you're a comedian, you have to constantly look over your shoulder, worry about what the crowd, quote unquote, which is typically a politically motivated, somebody linked to the ruling establishment, a bunch of goons are going to say, and how they're going to react to what you do. So this kind of pressure on movie makers, comedians is something which has reached a level where today I think it's seriously compromising creativity, seriously compromising the variety of what's available. And I think what's happened to Kunal Kamra mirrors what has happened to other comedians elsewhere. People have been thrown in jail in the past. There's a serious attempt to chuck him in jail as well. And there was a piece in the New York Times about how Hindi comedians have discovered an audience in America. Yeah. So they're sort of drawing full crowds there because they can't perform in India, right? So I think this is something which is very worrisome. Modi famously had said, "I don't mind criticism. People should criticize me." I wish the government had a thicker skin and did not react in this way to any form of cultural expression that they deem to be against them.
Just one point on to Siddharth, because a lot of comics talk about, we can't do political comedy. So the moment you make a choice of deliberately not doing political comedy, you are making a political choice, and that is politics. And I will judge you on your politics.
And there's been a lot of interesting comedians who have been speaking about caste-based discrimination and policies as well as politics as well. But finally, let's end this session with one final question to the two of you: that if you made a movie about this year,
what made it without looking over your shoulder?
Yeah, without any fear or favor, what would you call it?
Okay, should I go first? So
I need to think.
It's a tough one. I really don't know, and I'm not being original here, but I think I'll go with Sare Zameen Par. And it essentially comes from Jaishankar's famous statement in his book after he became the foreign minister, saying that India's foreign policy under Mr. Modi is like keeping all these balls up in the air at the same time, and having the dexterity to keep them up in the air at the same time. Now in 2025, when all the balls are lying on the floor, it is clearly a case of Sare Zameen Par.
If I was a filmmaker and I did not look over my shoulder, I'd make a movie called The Modi Files. These guys love that kind of title, Kashmir Files, Gujarat Files, Yevo. The Modi Files, which chronicles the complete collapse of the Modi mythology in 2025. foreign policy front, domestic front, economic front, cultural front. All of this needs to be documented, and I think it would make a great movie. Depressing, but great.
Okay, that's all we have for our year-end wrap. Thank you both so much for joining us, and thank you all for watching. We will see you again next year.